Hi everybody. I thought I would change your view a little bit so you can see the windows that have sunlight coming through them instead of snow. So I chose a book for today that is one that I've been saving until today because today's the last time that we will have a video before Easter. And I know lots of you like to decorate eggs at Easter. And so I'm going back to Patricia Polacco, who wrote this book called Rechenka's Eggs. And it's about a special goose and a woman who really loves it. And it also has a lot of information about these really super amazing and beautiful eggs that are done in a very specific style that is really, really a fun way to decorate eggs. I have been lucky enough to do it a bunch of times. I have a friend who really loves to do it and really loves to teach other people how to do it. And so I've been able to decorate a lot of eggs using this pasunki technique where you actually have a little tiny thing that looks like a pen, but you fill it with wax and the wax gets hot. You hold the little pen over fire, it melts the wax, and then you can draw designs on the egg and dip it in different colors and then melt that wax right off of it and then dip it in another color. And it's a really long and super fun process that creates these beautiful eggs. So I hope you enjoy the story. And then I've got a short poem to go with it that's just silly. Rechenka's Eggs, written and illustrated by Patricia Polacco. Babushka lived alone in a dacha, a little house in the country, but she was known far and wide for her fine eggs that she lovingly painted. Her eggs were so beautiful that she always won first prize at the Easter festival in Moscow. There's no picture with that, so I'll just turn the page. Each day, Babushka would take the shell of an egg from her basket and paint it in wonderful designs, using the shapes of stars and flowers, triangles and circles. Through the long, cold winter, Babushka painted. Then one day, after a snowstorm, Babushka went outside. She could still hear the faint sound of falling snow. It was a sound like soft rain. Herds of caribou came to feed at Babushka's because the grasses they usually ate were covered with snow. Caribou are animals that we don't have here, but they're very similar to deer or moose, kind of a cross between the two, or a mixture. But that would be the closest thing that you can imagine that they would be like. A miracle, she whispered as she fed some. These wild things have found their way to me. Just then, a flock of noisy geese honked loudly overhead. As they glided over the snow, one of them faltered and fell from the sky. Babushka went to where the goose lay, crumpled in the snow. A hunter did this, Babushka grumbled. She carefully picked up the goose and took it back to her little house. There, she fed the little goose from her own table and put the goose in her best basket, lined with the warmest quilt from her own bed. I shall name you a good name, one that we both can like, my little friend? She said as she patted the goose's head. How do you like Rechenka? Ah, yes, then Rechenka it shall be. And with Babushka's care, Rechenka grew stronger as each day passed. To repay her kindness, Rechenka laid an egg for breakfast every morning. As Rechenka got bigger, she waddled around the little house, exploring every nook, cupboard, and corner. One day, she jumped on top of Babushka's work table, overturning the jars of bright-colored paint that she used to color the eggs. Niet! Babushka screamed. That means no in Russian. She chased the goose with a broom. No! The frightened goose flapped her wings to get away and knocked over the basket of eggs that Babushka had so carefully, lovingly painted. The eggs crashed onto the floor and shattered into millions of pieces. They were both very sad There was no reason now for Babushka even to go to the Easter festival. So all of those months and months and months of work were lost because of an accident with the eggs being knocked over by Rechenka the goose. The next morning, Rechenka slowly got out of bed and trundled over to Babushka slowly got out of bed and trundled over to Rechenka's basket to get her morning egg. But when she reached into the middle of the quilt, she picked out the most brilliantly colored egg she had ever seen. "A miracle," Babushka whispered. "A miracle." So Rechenka had laid an egg that was already colored and decorated. She made small holes at both ends of the egg and blew the yolk and white into a dish to cook and eat later for breakfast. Then she held the egg up into the morning light and marveled at its beauty. When you marvel at something, it just means that you're amazed by it and you really look at the details of it, and you just, you might do something like this. If you're marveling when you look at something, you might go, oh, like that's how she felt when she looked. After that, every morning for 12 mornings, there was another egg, each more beautiful than the one laid the day before. Soon, Babushka had enough eggs to take to the festival in Moscow. How wonderful, she thought. A miracle has replaced the eggs that were broken. Now, sometimes when people decorate the eggs in this way, they do what Babushka's doing. They make a hole at the top and a hole at the bottom, and they blow out. If they blow through the top hole, the whole part of the egg comes out of the bottom hole. And sometimes people do that to help keep the eggs. But actually, if you just leave the eggs the way they are and they get decorated with that process that I was telling you about with melted wax and things, the yolk actually dries out over time. And so after you've had it for a few years, if you shake it, you can hear a little noise that tells you that the inside is all dried up and not rotten or anything like that. So you can blow it out, which makes the egg super, super fragile, or you can just leave the egg the way it is and the inside dries out eventually and gets very hard. "Spring is here, my little friend," said Babushka to Rechenka. "The morning of the festival. Soon you will be flying off to the north with your flock," because that's what birds do. Lots of different types of birds, including geese. They go somewhere in the winter where it's warmer, and then in the spring they come back to where it gets colder in the winter. So they go back and forth. That's called migration. Some animals do that for thousands and thousands of miles. In fact, many, many types of birds do that. Some ocean animals, like whales, do that. Butterflies do that. Thousands of miles the butterflies can fly back and forth once for part of the year, and then they come back to a different place for the other part of the year. And that's what Babushka is telling Rechenka she needs to get ready to do. She bustled to the hearth fire, brewed some of her most favorite tea. The two shared a saucer of tea with kulich, a sweet Easter bread. She covered each piece with pashka, a spread of cheese, butter, and raisins, and they savored each bit together. When you savor something, you really appreciate it, and you take your time, and you think about what it tastes like in your mouth. "One for you, and one for me," Babushka chanted. "Da, da, my little friend. I shall sorely miss you, but you are a wild thing, and a miracle sent you to me. It would not be right to ask you to stay here with me forever." And when Babushka left her little house, she took one last look at Rechenka sitting on the doorstep. She waved, and then she took determined steps for Moscow with the basket of her precious eggs. So she said goodbye to Rechenka, knowing that Rechenka would fly away to be with her flock of geese, and that she couldn't stay forever with Babushka. She crossed Lebetov Valley, where the caribou mothers were walking their newborn calves. A miracle, she thought. New little lives, a miracle. She crossed the bridge over the Moskva River, and soon she could see the onion domes of old Moskva. So this is a building, and if you look at the shape of the pieces that are on top of the building sticking up, they look like the shape of an onion before you cut it or use it for your cooking. So those are called onion domes because they look like the shape of onions. And that's a pretty common design or a common way of looking in buildings in Russia and the countries that are similar to Russia. Come on, page. Lots and lots of color on some of those buildings with the onion domes. The festival was bright and exciting. There were goat carts selling kulik, processions, dancers, jugglers, and laughing children playing and running. Babushka showed her old friends the eggs. Her eggs are the most beautiful in all of Russia. They all thought. Look at them, the elders said. They almost glow, as if the paint is part of the shell itself. The judges picked Babushka's eggs as the most beautiful. Babushka was so happy. She beamed as she looked at the first prize, a feather bed quilt. And so if you think back about how one of the elders said they look like the paint is part of the shell, remember that Rechenka laid those eggs. So the ones that Babushka had actually taken and painted had fallen and been broken. And so all of the eggs that she has to bring to the festival were laid by Rechenka, which means that the color probably is part of the shell. As Babushka made her way homeward, a honking flock of geese flew overhead. Babushka gave them a long, lingering look. She wondered if Rechenka was one of them. Lingering means she didn't look away. She looked at that flock of geese flying overhead and looked and looked and looked because she thought Rechenka might be part of that flock of geese. When Babushka arrived at her home that evening, Rechenka was gone. Alone, she put the new quilt on her little bed. She brewed a cup of tea, ate the last of the kulich and pashka, got into bed with her favorite book of poems, and drifted off to sleep. She hadn't noticed Rechenka's basket. So look and see if you notice anything about Rechenka's basket. But that night, Babushka was awakened from a sound sleep by an ever so small sound. It was coming from Rechenka's basket. She hobbled closer and saw a glorious egg. But this one was different from all the others. It quivered, which means to shake a tiny, tiny bit, and moved. It made tiny, muffled sounds. The egg jumped, bumped, rolled, and pitched in the basket. What's happening? What's happening with that egg? Then there was a crack, and Babushka could see the very special gift that Rechenka had left for her. All a miracle, Babushka said. And this little goose remained with Babushka always. It's one of my favorite stories. The words are as beautiful as the pictures are. And then to move on to something that maybe isn't as beautiful, but a little bit silly. This is called Weird Bird, and it's by Shel Silverstein. It's a poem. In the book, we talked about birds migrating, which is what Rechenka did. She left to go with her flock to where it would be cooler in the summertime. And when she left that little egg that hatched into a baby that stayed with Babushka forever. Now this is about a silly bird. The birds in Rechenka's eggs are not silly, but this one certainly is. Here's the picture that goes with it. You can tell by looking at the picture it's a silly bird, can't you? Oh, Elsa wants to say hi and listen. Hi. Hi. Birds are flying south for the winter. Here's the weird bird heading north. So he's going the opposite direction of all the other birds. Wings a flapping, beak a chattering, cold head bobbing back and forth. He says, it's not that I like ice or freezing winds and snowy ground. It's just sometimes it's kind of nice to be the only bird in town. So all of his friends and family go south for the winter where it's warmer. He goes north because he wants to be the only bird in town. So funny. What a funny little poem by Shel Silverstein. And that's it. It's Friday, so I will be back with you next week at the beginning of, not this coming week, but the following week. Next week is spring break. So you'll have a week of break time, and then we'll come back the following Monday. And I hope you have a wonderful break, and I will see you when we get back.